Yes, perfect.
Alrighty, folks. Thank you all again for coming today. My name is Bryan Landes. I am a global solutions architect at AWS. With Mars, we are hosting, the Dallas Kubernetes meetup. So thank you so much for coming. There's actually two CNCF meetups. We are the Kubernetes one, and Ollie right here is actually from the other CNCF, right? So we're actually going to try to combine them soon. But nevertheless, thank you so much. Is actually kind of have a brand new, so I guess like during COVID, we actually had a bunch of presentations, but basically what we're trying to do today is actually kind of reignite the community, right? We just wanted to host something big, and I just want to kind of give a shout out to Toyota. Mitch is actually about to present very soon about his adventure and his company's adventure on Backstage. And also I want to thank Vmware for one, all the food, and number two, thank you so much for coming in and presenting on tap in a second. Real quick, has anyone touched Backstage before? Does anyone know or even heard about this project by chance? Okay, cool. Awesome. This will be fun. So I'm going to talk about two major things a little bit. By the way, when I present on this, I just came off vacation, so I didn't really change a bunch of my slides. When I say the cloud, I'm not talking about AWS, I'm talking any cloud, right? So I want to be really blunt about that. So I post this picture up here because when I started talking about Backstage for a long time, no one really believed me. They were like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, no, this is going to be the best thing in the world. And this is about a year and a half ago. And what it was is that every time we started meeting with customers, we started asking these questions like, hey, why are you building a brand new internal development platform? And what they were really doing is basically they don't want their developers to open up 600 different Chrome tabs just to get their job done, right? And so I'll be talking about two different things. I'll be talking about Backstage and I'll be talking about platform engineering, okay? So if you actually look right here, while we're kind of talking and chatting, platform engineering is actually brand new. There's not a lot of documentation. It's actually kind of this huge paradigm shift that we're all kind of experiencing. If you're kind of curious, like what I'm talking about is, I wouldn't say that DevOps failed per se. All I'm saying is that platform engineering is actually way more prescriptive, right? And so just so you know that sometimes if it feels kind of like the Wild Wild West with platform engineering or Backstage, in a second you'll see what I'm saying, just realize it's a brand new, and by the way, this is Gartner, all that good stuff. I also want to say kind of back to that, always studying in Philadelphia picture. I honestly, for a long time, was like, am I going nuts? Because I keep saying these platform engineering and kind of abstracting all this stuff away from my developers. And it turns out, if you've ever been a fan of the DevOps report by Puppet, they actually changed the name from DevOps to platform engineering, right? Because basically, the DevOps talk was kind of more a cultural thought process. And then they realized that, hey, it's just easier to say platform engineering. So the big thing, like I was kind of mentioning very quickly, but if you actually look at this, right, back in the 2000s, we really didn't have a lot, right? I mean, and we did have a lot, but I'm just saying that we only had IDEs, we might have had some code, but as the world has turned after 2020, if you look on the far right, I mean, we have Terraform, we have Git, we have Docker, we have all these things that basically increases your developer or cognitive load, right? You just want to actually get your job done, but a lot of times your developers will spend so much time having to learn 6,000 tools that it kind of actually makes their life a little more chaotic. And so that's what Backstage is trying to solve. Like I kind of mentioned, DevOps, it's complicated, right? I would actually say on the bottom left, which is technology, that's the easiest part, right? We're all nerds here. We all look up different things all the time, but in reality, it's people, process, and culture, which is actually the hard part, right? Especially the culture part. And so again, I'm not saying that DevOps failed, it's kind of like a methodology. Again, kind of talking about developer cognitive load, a lot of times you'll kind of see something like this. Again, I wanted to mention too, I'm going to be talking about enterprises and small and medium business customers, but also developers as well. So I'm going to try to kind of interchange those a little bit. But just to get a database, a lot of times you actually have to submit a ticket into something like ServiceNow. You have to wait a couple weeks. Maybe there's Terraform that spins up a relational database or whatever have you. But nevertheless, like again, it's cognitive load. You just want your folks just to be able to go and push out code. While I talk about backstage and platform engineering, I just want to mention too that a lot of times when I'm talking about this, realize that there's a shared service platform or landing zone underneath my infrastructure. So if you actually look right here, this is where I'll be actually focusing, but just realize that there's usually a multi-account setup in some way, shape, or form, regardless of whatever cloud that you use. Okay. So the rise of internal development platforms. So basically, kind of I was mentioning about a year and a half ago during basically COVID, what happened was it just realized like, what if we just had a single pane of glass that had API calls to all the tools that you use and give everyone self-service capabilities to let them actually spin up infrastructure on their own, right? So if you actually see right here, this is actually kind of a definition what we've been seeing out in the open, but basically again is the self-service capabilities, give everyone golden paths, right? Guardrails, best practices, but most importantly is treating your platform as a product, right? And what I mean by that is that while you might have a platform engineering team giving out infrastructure to these developers, what they'll also do is take PFRs back, and they'll actually continuously keep building on this platform. In fact, Mitch from Toyota will be kind of talking about that in a couple minutes. So this is kind of what it actually looks like a little bit. So again, at the very bottom, I mean this, all clouds, but I just kind of put AWS on-premise and edge. One level higher, again, landing zone or shared service platform, that multi-account account setup that I just mentioned, but also the actual blue part right here. Basically, you will have some kind of orchestration spinning up infrastructure on the fly, and Backstage will actually be sitting on top. If you did not know, Backstage is made by Spotify. It's one of the largest, most popular CNCF projects. I would say it's the new Kubernetes of internal development platforms, or excuse me, portals. And then basically what you can do is actually almost have this multi-tenancy at the very top. I want to mention too, as I kind of talk about this a little bit more, Backstage is a developer portal, right? I'm going to be talking about also the platform, so it's both, right? So the portal sits on top, it's a front-end React app, and then on the bottom is the platform. Okay, so it kind of looks like this. And so basically what happens is that you'll actually have a platform engineering team actually build out codified YAMLs or Terraform or CloudFormation, does not matter, and actually put it through some kind of security review and actually store everything into Git. Everything's GitOps based. And basically what's happening is you actually will push your developers, your builders, la-di-da-di everybody through one focal point, which is usually Backstage, and it will be able to manipulate the infrastructure underneath it to spin up to X, Y, and Z. So for example, I think like Netflix actually uses this for GraphQL playgrounds. I see American Airlines. I don't know if, I think we did hear that one person from American Airlines might be here, but they are a huge Backstage user. So basically what they'll do is actually have a kind of an internal inner sourcing of plugins, right? So again, they're trying to make their community work. But nevertheless, basically you are pushing your best practices. Also looks like this. It does not matter where this is deploying. Just in this specific example, I'm pointing out different regions, so US East 1, 2, and West. But this also could be your corporate data center. This could be VMware. This could be anything. It could be GKE. It could be whatever you want. But again, you're pushing your entire enterprise through one centralized focal point. Okay. I'm going to skip. Oh, yeah. One thing I wanted to say real quick before I kind of skip a little bit faster. Like I mentioned, platform engineering is brand new. It literally changes per day. I mean, literally, I'm sitting there half the time just like Googling what's new. But again, kind of to the flow, just realize that a lot of times platform engineering is kind of the new DevOps. You're building workflows. It is much easier to extend a platform to someone rather than make them learn 5,000 tools, right? Okay, I'm gonna go a hint faster. Actually, 2 seconds on this one. If you are very interested in this or curious, there's a book. Yes, I'm gonna make you buy a book. No, I'm just kidding. But it's called Team Topologies. If you have has anyone actually seen this book or heard about this? All right, we got a couple. All right. So if you've ever read the Phoenix Project or the Unicorn Project or any of these other types of books, basically Team Topologies tells you in a prescriptive guidance on how to make a strangler pattern on how to build a centralized platform. And basically it'll actually tell you how to situate your teams to actually focus around a centralized platform so your teams can actually self-service. Okay, I'm gonna go a little bit faster. Okay. I just want to mention what I'm talking about right here is that most people think platforms are like this. In reality, it's this. There's tons of things. There's account vending machines. There's things that you would have to build for your entire enterprise. And the reason why these platforms are so important is because basically platforms will actually power your entire cloud program. All right, I'm going to get straight to backstage. Okay, so backstage. By the way, the beaver's name is Bowie, like David Bowie. So backstage. Spotify actually has the most successful internal development platform I've ever seen. What they did is they actually started just building in the front end and started building underneath that infrastructure that I was kind of talking about. And what's so funny for them is that there's about 2,000 users internally for Spotify, and they have about 2,000 plugins, right? And what it is basically what they're doing is they're extending the platform to their teams. And what's so nice about Backstage, at least in an open source project, is it's a framework, right? So not everyone's company is actually set up the same internally, right? That's okay. But with Backstage, what you can do is write as much front end infrastructure as you want to basically fit your company. So for example, AWS is set up very distinctly. Facebook, Google, doesn't matter. Basically, you can bring in Backstage, write it to your organization, right? Also, I want to mention it's highly popular. It's 21,000 stars. I checked it earlier today. And there's a huge list of adopters from small enterprises to big enterprises, from small companies to big companies. Fidelity, Netflix, it just goes on and on. Toyota and a bunch of other major companies have adopted this framework. This is actually, I stole these slides from the actual Backstage open source deck because I like the way they talk about it. I usually talk about it from a cloud point of view because a lot of times I'm just trying to help speed up folks regardless of what cloud they use. But the way that they come at it is actually from a developer experience point of view. And I think that's actually really smart. And the thing is because what they're really trying to tell you is that the chaos control. There's so much sprawl, there's so many tools, from linting to Terraform, it gets out of control. It's just like sometimes I just want to do my job, right? Also scale. So a lot of times when you start out with these platforms, or even administer scale, it's very small at first. There might be 5 or 10 developers that might be using it, but at a certain point in time, you can scale up to thousands. Hewlett-Packard is actually a good example. I think they have about 3,000 people using their developer platform on Backstage. And again, they started very small. Again, it helps scale and the chaos control. Last but not least is speed. Obviously, agility. We want you to build fast and build out features. So this is actually their Backstage at Spotify. This is it. Ta-da! No, I'm just kidding. But what is important about this real quick is it's classy. You want your folks to come to these portals, and that's why you treat it as a product, right? If you actually look on the left-hand side, you can actually tell there's machine learning, there's data, there's experimentation, or an account vending machine, right? So basically, you click 3 buttons, gives you an account. You can, $200, and you can do X, Y, and Z, right? Also, you can tell on the far right side, it's all the toolboxes, and you can see the Stack Overflow set up, and a couple of these different tooling that is kind of normal. I actually have a friend that works at Spotify that's outside of the Backstage team, and he's an Android developer. He's a senior Android developer. And it's so interesting, because this is all tied by Active Directory. I'll go back to that in a second. But if you kind of look up here, right on the top right, you can see how there's New York time, London, Stockholm, and UTC. But what I'm trying to say is that everything's tied by Active Directory. So my buddy, that's an Android developer, when he logs into Backstage, his whole portal is red. It's red. So he has all his Android tools. I forgot all the toolkits with Android off the top of my head, but basically anything that he needs to do to develop. So when he switched from an Android developer to an iOS developer, his whole portal turned blue because now he's an iOS developer. And all of his tools were already there, baked in, ready to go, because that platform engineering team is constantly building out these best practices and giving it to them. Real quick, I want to mention before I show a little bit more, I'm going to kind of run a hint out of time. This is actually what it kind of looks like. Again, I stole slides from Spotify. So you have a UI that is Backstage. And basically, any time that you're actually hitting this front end, you're also hitting plugins. There's different types of plugins, but very simple is you can have a simple plugin that actually is, it can be a container, right? You hit the plugin. It also could hit the back end, so it'd be React in the front, and then on the back could be, it doesn't matter, Polygon. It's just whatever you need to do with the API calls. Or you can actually have something like this Circle CI plugin, and you can proxy out. Right? So this means that if you have Jenkins or any of these other things that you need to bring over, you can literally proxy out to your existing ecosystem and tool chain. Again, it's about that cognitive load, right? You just want to reduce it as much as possible. Scan through this as fast as possible, but there's about 6 things that's really, really good about Backstage, okay? It is the software catalog, which I'll show in a couple seconds. And then also the templating. I definitely want you, Mitch, to talk about that in a second. Also the search. What's really nice about search for this is that you can actually connect it to your Confluence. You can connect it to your Git repos. And basically you can have a huge enterprise search so that any time that your developers log into a portal, all of a sudden all their docs are there. They're inner-sourcing, right? You want your community to work together better, right? Also, discoverability. That is what it's really good at. It's very good at almost like tracing, where you can actually reference your software catalogs and components to one another. And so everyone actually has a full 360 point of view of what's going on. I also want to mention the plugins. And if you actually look on the bottom right, that's the open source catalog for plugins. So plugins is basically any kind of additional functionality that you might need. So I think Sneak's in here somewhere. Right. So basically, you can bring in any kind of vendor that you want. So Sneak actually, I believe, has a plugin that you can actually just install straight into your Backstage, and all of a sudden you have this type of functionality that they provide. You can also have something like Jenkins or Proton or Tab. I mean, it's up to you. But just remember, plugins is your business logic that might be missing, and you can write it yourself. And that's what actually makes this super powerful. Okay. So when you look at this screen, again, this is their Backstage at Spotify. Observability for all. Everyone gets a dashboard. If you look on the far right, you can see that little Grafana sign. Basically, it's C-suite down. So as a CTO, I may not care. Little Bryan is pushing out code, but I do care about my cloud cost. I care about who's certified. I cared about the security issues. Right? And again, this gives observability all the way top down, right? You're trying to uniform your entire teams. If you actually look here as well, the squad ownership is basically different types of self-service catalog capabilities. I'll kind of quickly touch on that, but again, you're trying to unify your entire team. Spotify, at the very top right, actually has their entire organization coming through this portal. Again, best practices, la-di-da-di for everybody. Does not matter if you're from Stockholm, New York, doesn't matter. Okay, So I have about 5 more minutes, so I'll be a little bit quicker. But this is coming to some of the self-service catalogs. Basically what happens is you can actually click on these buttons and it'll actually bring up a scaffolder, kind of like your Jenkins pipeline. You would fill out very simple information, just like what is the name of your application, what Git repository you want to push it to, and then within seconds, it would actually spin up your infrastructure. The whole point of Backstage is you want to be able to give this infrastructure to people very, very quick, within seconds, right? Again, we're trying to speed up people with best practices. So you can kind of see the difference between the documentation, React, and again, I just want to mention too, if you actually look here, this is the data science teams. So sometimes this is actually for your business users as well. So this is another example as this person kind of scans through. But basically what they're showing here is basically, again, that self-service catalog. And what they're doing is they're trying to make sure that you can SSO into different parts of these different tooling without trying to make it too complicated, right? So it's Grafana, Argo, Thanos, whatever have you. I'm going to show you this one, and then I'm going to show you some customer examples, and then we'll switch over to Mitch. The one big thing about all this, and I wish I had more time, but it's also financial tracking, right? A lot of times, folks don't always know how much they're spending on the cloud. And a lot of folks, you know, at least from my point of view, no one wants anyone to spend $5 trillion on the cloud, right? We just want you to be able to build and build fast. And so these portals will actually showcase how much you're spending on the cloud. And so what they'll do is they'll actually gamify it, right? So they'll say, okay, I have, you can deploy a React app on containers, or you can deploy a React app on serverless. It's going to cost X amount and X amount. And so a lot of times you'll see developers actually switch to serverless because they're actually trying to save money. And they'll actually gamify it. So like if you save enough money, you'll get like an Echo Dot or something. And also you can actually see, for some reason my slides are not showing up as pretty, but they'll actually check carbon footprint and sustainability efforts. So they'll say, okay, containers have this much emissions and serverless will have this much emissions. And then you'll see a lot of folks actually lean into the cloud and lean into the strategy for what they are trying to save. Okay, so I'm gonna be a little bit faster. Again, just remember, Backstage is a framework. Shh, Siri. Okay, Backstage is a framework. So there's a CLI. There's also the actual Backstage itself, and then it gives you all the tools like CSS frameworks to build out your own. This is Netflix. So Netflix adopted this, and this kind of made our eyes perk up. Like, okay, Netflix loves this thing. Let's see why. And it's because basically, again, they can own Backstage for their organization. So you can actually see that they have a data platform API, gRPC, and again, it's self-service capabilities to give this infrastructure out to folks. Tanzu, there you go. So VMware in a couple seconds, we'll kind of talk about this, but I bring this up is because it's so big and popular that VMware decided to adopt it. This is actually Zalando. So if you look on Zalando, this is all open source. I'm not like stealing things, but basically you can see here, you can actually see all your GitHub repositories, what you're doing with code and merging. But more importantly, if you look right here, this is the updates. So every couple weeks, they will update the platform and tell everyone what has changed. Again, you got to treat it as a product. So I have about 2 minutes. I'm going to show a couple quick more. Here's about all the tech docs, right? So this is inner sourcing. Everyone has the same documentation. Everyone can share with one another. Here is an actual CI/CD pipeline. It actually has different stages. Every button is actually actionable. So you can actually say, restart your build, whatever you need to do, inspect your logs. But again, the whole idea is that they don't have to go through 5,000 different Chrome tabs. They can just stay on one portal. So this is actually American Airlines. They call it Runway. I just kind of wanted to show another example. If you look on the left-hand side, you can see how they're actually using Apogee and infrastructure and also the inner sourcing. A lot of times these portals are not just only about giving out infrastructure, it's like how do you make your entire enterprise actually work together better, right? And that's actually what you're really doing. You're trying to ignite your enterprise to be kind of built by builders or developers by developers, right? You're trying to really ignite this, and so that's why they have inner sourcing. Box, same thing. This is kind of just a software catalog. Deutsche Bank, so same thing. They actually branded their own. And SoundCloud. So I brought up SoundCloud because I thought it was interesting because basically it's almost like a competitor to Spotify, right? But what's interesting is that if you actually look on the top right, you can actually have announcements actually pushed out. So say, for example, if you wanted to tell every single person or part of your enterprise, like, hey, we're all off on Friday, you can push these announcements out. And again, dashboards for all. Okay, so I think, DAZN, and that's it. I'm gonna stop right here. The very last thing I want to mention is that Spotify actually has their own paid plugins, which is very interesting. And what I just want to mention is that a lot of these plugins that you kind of see, at least with Skill Exchange and Pulse, is they're trying to make your enterprise work together. So with Skills Exchange, for example, I can actually say, hey, you're really good at HTML. Well, I'm really good at CSS. Let's be friends. And we can actually mentor one another. A lot of times with enterprises, we don't always know who's good at what, right? So again, you're trying to make your teams work. With Pulse and Insights, you can actually send surveys down through your enterprise to get feedback on your product. And then, Soundcheck is kind of more of your best practices that they interact. So I'll pause there. I am just definitely the prequel. And Mitchell, if you want to come up.
Thank you. Just press that. All right. All right. Good evening, everyone. Hi, I'm Mitch Jenkins, staff software engineer at Toyota Motor North America, and I'll be talking a bit about our cloud engineering platform and Chofer at Toyota. Use this. Check one. All right. So a quote from our president, Akio Toyoda from Toyota Motor Corporation is, "There is no best, only better." I'm going to be speaking to how the Toyota way has impacted the growth there, and then taking a look at the product we have at this point in time today. So just a high level of the Toyota production system. You know, it's famous in manufacturing, but it can be applied to both business technology and software engineering. Some of the core principles are delivering high quality with low cost with the shortest amount of lead time. And the core purpose is to eliminate waste to achieve that and continuously improve. So what was the need for the journey? Well, there's a market demand. Our main product at this point in time was vehicles. And over the years, obviously, the technology inside these vehicles has grown. The electrification of the drivetrains and transmissions and everything inside of it is now all computers. And then not only the vehicle itself, but all the operations and technology it takes to support a product or a whole enterprise, right? The role of software increases, and everything requires richer features to meet customers and their demands. So as the technology grew and the teams grew, like many other companies, silos began to build up. There was locally optimized life cycles within each of those silos, not a lot of information sharing across, not a lot of optimization. And with that grew a large number of applications as well. So they needed to develop a strategy of how do you optimize this and streamline all of this development. And so ultimately they need to plan it. So, at that point in time, I think a lot of the infrastructure was on premises. It all followed old ITSM and ALM processes. All this rigid change control and whatnot. So they needed to build DevOps on top of that. So it started with those central practices and then make that more streamlined and efficient. The order of CAMs at Toyota was automation, measurement, culture, and sharing. And there's a lot of different areas of the software development lifecycle with many different features, some of them more low-hanging fruit versus some moonshot items. This is kind of a look at how a plan would go as far as what can be done now, what's coming up in the nearest future, and then what could be those future items to help prioritization, because not everything can be tackled all at once. So the first objectives were to define what would be the scope. And so ultimately they decided, all right, let's focus on this cloud to be more agile and focus on that as the use case. The vision included we needed a velocity of adoption, reliability, and cost efficiency. So in order to achieve that, there's a lot of tools that Bryan highlighted as well, which go into that. So I mean, this part talks about they needed to select that tool set. They started out with a lot of open source, start small, start easy, start cheap. But they needed to build scalable workers, flexible build engine. So like I said, there were those silos, and with those silos were a bunch of different subject matter experts in different technology stacks. So there was no like single technology stack. So the platform needed to support all of these different technologies. And ultimately, security is important for everybody. So the security needs to be an initial thought and supported in the tool stack from the beginning. So they got a bunch of tools, they put them out there, they said, hey, you can use this, go do it now. There's these teams building applications to go deliver business value, but what was the outcome? It looked a little bit like this picture, right? Not much organization, everybody is rushing to production, and ultimately the output was low quality, high cost, and inefficient lead time. So they need to take a look. Some of the principles here are Genchi Genbutsu, which means go and see what's going on, and then Kaizen, continuously improve on that. Okay, so they found the challenge. Software is much richer than it used to be. There's a lot of moving parts, and it can be slow to build due to the complexity. So on the left, again, we have these application teams. They need to build an application, and that's what they're good at. They focus on these pieces. They know they need to have a front end for their customers to use or the employees internally to use. It may have a back end, connect to another back end. Maybe there's some external APIs, and ultimately it needs a database to connect to. So that's their bread and butter. That's what they focus on. But now, this team over here said, hey, there's all these tools you need to start using. Okay, well, this is news to me. How do I use any of this? So like there's all these areas where they previously didn't have to maintain this on-prem because there were separate teams owning this. In the cloud, they own it end-to-end. They've got to build it, deploy it. They've got to hook into their monitoring, tracing, logging, and own it. What they put out, they got to support. So ultimately, we needed to make it simple for product teams to produce high-quality digital products that matter. And in order to move towards success, I think there needed to be a cultural shift. So with this came a thought of a two-platform approach. So we still have the application teams. They can be a digital business platform. They focus on their application, delivering that value to the business. Whereas on the right side, we build a foundational technology platform. This is a platform team of subject matter experts in these fields here. They love to deal with infrastructure and making things automated and putting that all together, right? But then how do you make these two in sync? And so there needs to be essentially a well-defined contract between these two or a shared responsibility model. Ultimately, the strategy here was the platform team would provide X as template, as code, as service levels. So providing, example, DevOps pipelines as a template to hand that over to the application teams, infrastructure as code templates, and then build in some service level objectives inside of that. All right, so now I'm going to dive a bit into that that platform engineering team, the team I'm from. So we have a few key products and services. I want to highlight there's blueprints. The goal of blueprints is to accelerate teams to shift left, have automatic hooks and measurements and metrics all inside of that, best practices and security inside of that as well. Then there's the self-service portal, which helps provide that frictionless self-service adoption. Some of the key services are SRE reviews, focusing on day 2, ensuring there's reliability. And then there are some specialists like cloud economics, making sure that workloads are optimized, financially responsible, more efficient. And then some of the guiding principles were inner sourcing. So there's one team with a fixed capacity. We can't solve everything at once, and we can't just get a bunch more people to build more things. We have applications trying to build things. If we don't support something, they can take the initiative to develop that themselves and then provide that back to the community for the greater good so that we can share that out for everybody to reuse. Focusing on self-service. Again, we don't need a team of people receiving tickets, pushing some buttons, and having something deployed when we can automate it end to end. Community practice. So build some of these community practice, communities of practice to talk about best practices, learn from each other, provide these tools and share that knowledge around. And then API-based, and this may not be literally APIs, but again, well-defined contracts where you know what these inputs are and you know what the outputs you'll get will be. Okay, so I'm going to dig probably a good amount into blueprints here. I did spend a good amount of time building some of the foundational infrastructure templates for this. So ultimately, it's an opinionated and supported path to build something. The majority of what we have at this point is building infrastructure as code. When we look at this portal and self-service product, the strategy that we've taken at this point in time is really focusing on providing software templates from Backstage. The value this brings is everything will be built as code, but not only that, the business platform or the application teams, they will own that code that's theirs to modify as little or as much as they need to within the guardrails or constraints. Bryan mentioned guardrails, and for us, those are TM&A specific, so specific to us, what are our cloud standards for architecture or security standards. AWS or any cloud platform will provide a lot of different available configurations. There's all these different types of databases you could produce, but ultimately, we still need to have some standards and try to rein that in a little bit so that it's not completely the Wild West. So with that, we can, for example, configure specific parameters to be more strict, like you can't expose port 22 to the world, for example. Or additionally, for architecture standpoint, we want RDS databases to be Postgres. Even though it supports MySQL or Oracle, we're not going to allow that variable to be selected through the templates here. But ultimately, what this is doing is guiding the developers to improve their experience, have less choices. They don't need to think as much about what they need. Their standards, they're what we define as best practices, and they're able to use that out of the box. So talking about blueprints specifically, we have 3 levels of definitions. At the lowest level, that's your lowest building block, it's a module or infrastructure blueprint. Typically, that's a more complex piece of infrastructure. We can take S3 as an example. It seems very simple, everybody uses it, but when you get down to the details, there's a lot of different configuration you have to do to make it secure, have the logging enabled, all the different settings, bucket policies. All of that is packaged in and is reusable as a single building block. Then we can take multiple of these modules or infrastructure blueprints and build an architecture out of them. Architectures that we use commonly in our environments and what we want teams to use as well. So if we expand on the S3 bucket, we can build a single page application where it's got S3 with CloudFront, WAF, observability built in, and even pipelines that are able to deploy that out automatically. You take that a step further, and if you put boilerplate application code on top of that to a specific technology stack, you can then build a reference architecture blueprint. So in this example, we have an Angular app on top of the single page application to make that end-to-end for a specific technology. All right, digging into the portal, there's a few different key services that are provided here. So again, the self-service blueprints, this is the user interface available to expose that to our users and have them download those blueprints. Software catalog can be a central repository. I think Bryan highlighted several examples of what this can be. But keeping a central location for all the cloud applications, it can give their links to their documentation, their solution architecture diagrams, hook into their builds, what are their integrations, and supply all those metrics on top of it as well. We've got a lot of additional features to build onto there today, from our point today, but there's a lot of availability there. Next, a big point is education and training. It can be that centralized location for the educational documentation, training videos. Again, the goal is to make this a single pane of glass for all you need. Bryan also highlighted the economics and financial operations that can show your cost data, opportunities for improvement in that aspect. And then some of the newer items are SRE and metrics. We're providing some of our opinionated SRE practices so that we can help evangelize that out to our organization, show a case study, and ultimately we're going to build out an interactive maturity model where teams can actually go in, take their application, take their team, evaluate themselves against the scoring matrix, and see how mature that is calculated to. That can be, transparent and showed out to help build that practice and increase that as well. Okay, so now we get to actually look into some of the screens here. So again, our product is called Chofer, and the idea is that application teams should be able to drive themselves throughout this portal. So looking at the blueprints, the goal here is it's showing you what you're getting, giving you a description so you understand what you're going to get out of it. There's if you dig into some of those details, they're being provided a well-architected score. So some of our cloud architects go through these blueprints. Again, they're evaluated against our security team, our architecture team, to make sure our best practices are implemented in here. So this is showing at least what is in scope for this particular blueprint, how well does this score with what is in scope. For transparency, so that teams understand what they're getting. It can also, show areas of improvement or gaps that need to be filled. Next is around the education and that community-based learning. So this is new to a lot of the teams. And again, we have, with those silos, we had different levels of expertise in the cloud. So we can provide some of that more basic level knowledge there, show how to use the tool in case they get stuck. I built a few videos on understanding, that's what I didn't talk about. I'll talk about that next. How we actually utilize these blueprints so that they can understand that and use it properly. It was important to build kind of brand awareness as well. Bryan mentioned this as well. Most of their people implementing this build it as a product. So again, this is Chofer. Need to build brand awareness around, if I have a question about this, where do I go? Go to Chofer. And then Cloud Ed was kind of the educational component of that. And then just highlighting kind of on that education, in addition to that, there are features for, we write many FAQs so that we have that basic question answer for those quick information. If there's more details needed or walk through certain processes with images, we can build that into tech docs for that more technical documentation. Now, providing the insights with that single pane of glass. On the home screen here, there's a newer feature for this Insights horizon. So this is more toward, the executive level type of dashboard, but showing what is your security score. We have our cloud security team, which has security scorecards. They're creating rules almost weekly, it seems. As new rules get pushed out, scores drop. And then they got to go figure out, all right, how are we going to resolve these security scores and get back to that A, get as high as you can on that security. Again, it's transparent and anybody can see it. So we want to make sure that that stays positive, right? Same with financials. There's areas where you can provide estimates for what you're going to spend monthly on the cloud. That's eventually builds that gray line there, and then it'll show your actuals, what we charge back to the teams from their cloud spend, and it'll measure and show you if you're overrunning your budget by how much. It'll highlight that red, and then it calculates based off of your estimate how much budget you have remaining for that fiscal year to make sure that's top of mind and that you're not leaving resources running out there spending money for no reason. All right, looking a little bit into the productivity, like how has this actually helped deliver value and speed up? When we're looking at blueprints versus no blueprints, on the left hand, without the blueprints, the teams, again, the business platform teams are application teams. They're focusing on the application. The business is coming, oh, we need this feature, we need these features to go live. Again, they're rushing to production. And they're delivering all this value and they're building an application. But wait a minute, that's to run somewhere, right? Then they come into the afterthought. Okay, all right, now we're responsible for building out infrastructure. How do we do that? We're not experts here. And then I think what that's highlighting is actually tickets we receive in. So every day almost, I feel like I'm getting tickets saying, hey, we're trying to go to production. We need help. We're stuck. How do we get this going? Whereas when we use blueprints, they're able to focus on those business delivering features and the infrastructure comes to them well architected to begin with. So it decreases how many tickets we'll receive and really improve that developer experience. And some of the metrics there were it shortened lead time by about 8 weeks for delivering basically an MVP to production. The next one is kind of highlighting the development from centralized subject matter experts in a platform team versus the generic application developers who may not have that expertise. And essentially, those with that experience are able to develop that same feature faster. It's measured approximately 6 weeks faster. But on top of that, there's all that reuse. Many teams would have to do the same things over and over without sharing that. Whereas if we bring that in centrally, we're able to develop that once and share out and reuse many times. Highlighting a bit of the shared responsibility model, the platform team, again, focuses on maintaining a reliable platform. They increase that reliability score, build in these observability tools so that they have some of those golden signals by default, some key dashboards that highlight what you should be looking at when you're using this, and then package it all up into a blueprint. The application team is then responsible for do a game day participation, understand what you need to do when something fails, how do you bring that back up? Write observable code. Your code is only as good as, or your logs are only as good as what you put into it, and you will only get out what you put into that, right? So that's got to be high quality when you're writing that. Integrated test suites, make sure you're testing everything so that it's all high quality, and then you shift left code. So the platform's providing all these tools. Use these tools to help decrease that development loop and speed up their delivery. All right, with that, ultimately, DevOps and platform engineering helps deliver work-life balance. With these, The infrastructure is built so that it's reliable from the beginning. And if you're starting on a reliable platform, you're less likely to have issues where you got to stay up all night, come in on the weekends. With all these automation and delivery tools, you can deploy more often, use some of these strategies, blue-green deployment, so you don't have to take an outage time just to do a deployment. You can deploy at any point in time. Make things observable, make things automatic, and continuously improve. So we've still got a good ways to go here, but we're happy to have provided this to our teams. We're getting good value at it. The usage is increasing, and ultimately we're going to keep building upon this and deliver more to our customers. With that, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
So my name is Corby Page. I work with the Tanzu division of VMware, and about 18 months ago we got very much bit by the same bug that Bryan did in terms of getting very excited about Spotify as a tool for being able to deliver application platforms. So VMware, the Tanzu division has participated in the Backstage community in two ways. One is by contributing to the open source. So we've been very excited about being able to contribute to things like the catalog, the Kubernetes plugin, the locations, being able to do integrations with Azure. But we're really excited about working towards being able to make it simpler to build, contribute plugins, and create customized distributions of the platform for your enterprise. So I absolutely love watching presentations like Mitch from Toyota. I love watching the montage that Bryan does at the end where he shows all the different companies and how they're using Backstage and stuff. Because when you look at the people that implement Backstage, when you look at Toyota, American Airlines, US Bank, Netflix, no two implementations are the same. They are the expression of that company's ideas and philosophies about what it means to build a developer platform and what it looks like for them. And the ecosystem has thrived because of the open marketplace, that you have open source and also commercially supported plugins that are available for people to use. You know, Bryan mentioned that Spotify has their own commercial marketplace now, and we distribute our own plugins as part of Tanzu application platform. And it's very healthy because as companies, you can look at them and you might say, hey, that's something I'd like to go and consume as is, or that just might be inspiration for me. This is art of the possible, gives me more ideas about what kind of things I like to build and consume for my own company as well. So I think it's very interesting to be able to take a look. So we'll go hands-on a little bit with Backstage here, and in the process giving ideas, some of the ideas that we've been thinking about in terms of what how a developer platform can be extended here. Excuse me. So I'm good. Excuse me. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into here. So this is our branding of Backstage, Tanzu application platform, and it's built on the same core components that Bryan described before as well. So you have this idea of a catalog where developers can publish the projects that they're working on, and as a developer, I can go on and discover what the architecture and components are of the software that's being produced in my company and learn how to contribute. So I go on in and take a look at the systems here, and we've got a system of microservices that are being set up here. So this is our order service, and I can browse, I can go directly to the source code for the component that I'm interested in. I can take advantage of the tech docs capability to view published information within the enterprise about things like the system architecture and how this stuff works. I can look at how it interacts and interoperates with other systems. I can get this text view of the system here, or I can go to the graphical view and take a look at what the other components are and be able to drill down into those. going in here. And be able to navigate that way. So, and so it's built on the core Backstage concepts of components and resources and systems and APIs. And APIs are a first-class citizen here because that's going to be the most common way that your teams interact with other teams in order to be able to reuse their software. And so once again, this is all part of open source Backstage. You have this concept of being able to go at the APIs and take a look at published definitions on there. I can look at things like what are the REST endpoints for the API, what are the schemas that are being used in order to, data that I want to be able to use. And I can do live invocations, right? So let's take a look at this inclusion API where I can get a list of emojis for different purposes in here. I can say I'm going to try it out and go ahead and execute on the API. I can see the response body of the API. I can enter different parameters and so on. So as a software developer, I can get an idea of, okay, how am I going to be able to actively use and consume these APIs and be able to interoperate in my software systems. I mentioned before that again, part of open source Backstage, you have this concept of the tech doc system, which is kind of a wiki system for being able to share information about your software. It's integrated in here, but you can put together all kinds of detailed information and make it easy to onboard new teams, understand what your services do, how to use them, what their role is within the architecture of your company. And it's backed up by a robust search engine. So open source Backstage gives you the ability to go on in and say, hey, I want to be able to look up stuff and find, for different concepts, what are the services, what are the external resources and such in the system, and be able to navigate to your information that way. So off that base, which is basically what every one of these companies starts off when they begin, starting with Backstage, then we say, hey, where do we extend from there? And the guidelines there are going to be, what Bryan talked about in terms of people, process, and culture, what Mitch talked about in terms of a culture shift, this idea of saying, how are we going to make our different teams be better at our jobs? How are we going to do better than we started off with DevOps and not get into holes where the developers are getting stuck in terms of the software delivery process. So some of the opinions that we contributed here were building on the templating system, the kind of blueprints that Mitch described, and use this concept called application accelerators, which is just kind of a next iteration off of the template. So we want to start off with this kind of best practices out there in terms of, hey, what are the languages, what are the tool chains, what are the patterns that are supported by my enterprise architecture team when I want to develop and deliver applications in here. In my enterprise, I have things like support for Angular, support for functions, support for web, React, Node, type of thing here. And when I find a template that's a good starter for the type of project that I want to do, then I can go ahead and begin customizing that template. So I can go ahead and fill out information specific to my project. I can say, for example, do I want to choose between Graven or Mato as my build tool? What are the databases that are supported by my enterprise? What version of Java do I want to use here in this case? Also expose the open API endpoint. So we'll get into this in a minute, but ultimately we're going to want to be able to publish this API back to the software catalog, just like we saw with that inclusion API. And this is going to provide a mechanism to be able to do that. And so I can go through and select the different tools that I want to use here. One thing that's nice about this interface is that we say, hey, let's give developers a chance to preview this stuff before they go on in. So we give them this Explore file so we can get a sneak preview of, for the parameters that the developer entered here on the template, what is this going to look like in terms of the code that's getting published out onto my machine. And so I get a chance to see what the source code is going to look like, the skeleton, the test templates, all this. I can see, for example, here it generated a Maven POM file that's using Java version 17. If I say, oops, I don't want that, let me go back to Java version 11 instead. Here, I'll hit my Explore. And it'll generate a new template. So once again, I can preview and make sure that this is what I want in here. So I'll take a look at my POM, and now I'm on Java version 11 is what's populated into here. So I get a good view of what the template is going to look like, and if this is the right thing for me. And then another thing we began to reason about was, hey, obviously we can tell from Mitch's presentations and others that this portal becomes a real popular destination from developers, but it's not necessarily where they're always doing their day-to-day work. Where developers live is in the IDE, and would it make sense that when we have core development tasks like generating templates to bring Backstage down into the IDE, and so that you don't have to context switch back and forth between the developer portal and the IDE. So with IDEs like Visual Studio and IntelliJ, we brought out plugins that you can use to browse that same accelerator interface and be able to browse and generate new projects from within the IDE so that you're ready to go. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and select my project. I'm going to use the open source Backstage capabilities to be able to publish this project to a Git repo at the same time that I download it onto my local machine. So I'm going to drop my mic for a minute here. And I will set up, select the repo that I want to set up, and go ahead and generate my accelerator. So I'll go into my projects folder here, choose the project. Okay, and then we're good to go. And so now I'm basically running the Backstage workload from within the IDE. So it's going to generate the template for us from the Backstage, apply the customizations that I asked for, and it's going to upload the, oops, I did want to open that in a new window, please. Where did it go? Did I lose my new window? I was talking too much. Where's my new window here? Put it in. Did it put it in this window? No. Where did it put it? Give me my project. Okay, I think it's going to generate it again here. Okay, no, but because I already created one of that name here. Anyway, what it does is it creates a new Visual Studio project that's pre-populated in there where I can go and do my development. And if I go over to my Git repo, I can see that it created my new CNCF app a minute ago here. So now, as a developer, I'm ready to go, right? I have the live IDE project. I can immediately write my code. It's synced to my Git repo, and I can begin developing my code and get go. So, we're trying to get into this mindset of, number one, obviously Backstage is an incredible collaboration tool for being able to share with other development teams what it is that we're working on and how you can participate and get on board. And then we want to kind of extend that into the development process and allow the developers to go faster in terms of being able to create projects from well-known good blueprints and be able to deliver code into that. And then once you've got the project running, we went ahead and thought about, hey, what can we do to provide developer contextual information about the runtime so that they can be more productive in terms of getting to those iteration loops where you deploy, you debug, and then you get back going again. So we said, the open source Backstage comes with a Kubernetes plugin, which is pretty simple. It basically just kind of gives you a view of resources that are running on the server. But we said, hey, can we go ahead and provide a little bit more power here to the developer in terms of doing that? So we kind of extended that. We created what we call a runtime resources plugin. So it's going to give developers visibility into the Kubernetes resources that are deployed into their development environment. In this case, I have my Tanzu Java web app running as a pod, but we went ahead and extended that a little further, and we said, okay, now we're going to add capabilities for Java and .NET core apps to be able to use what we call an actuator, which is basically endpoints where we can publish runtime information about the application and make it consumable through Backstage. So in this case, for example, I can go ahead as a developer, if my deployed container isn't running quite like things run on my local machine, I can view the logs and see what's going on here. I can, have problems with the scrolls here, guys. Show me there we are. I can take a look at the environment variables for the application that are running into the container. I can take a look at thread dumps for the threads that are on my machine. So if I need to look at the thread stack trace and see if anything's going on in there for the runtime. I can take a look at the memory usage. Maybe my application's running a little sluggish. I want to make sure that in terms of the memory consumption on the container, is everything going okay in there. I want to take a look at the HTTP activities. So it's tracking HTTP requests and responses. It'll give me the response time on the request. I can take a look at the request response payloads on activity that comes on into the application. So the idea here is that we're trying to extend this through the process. So you use Backstage on board and you get information about the project, and then you want to go and we say, okay, how can we get the developer productive into their IDE as soon as possible, and how can we get them into these iterate cycles where they're able to see information about the runtime and not have to dig into the container and the Kubernetes and all that to be able to do debugging and be able to quickly make the bug fixes they need to be able to commit. So, that's kind of what we thought about in the developers, and it also helps the developers a lot if we can get the platform engineering team off their back and we can get the security team off their back, right? So if we can also use Backstage as a tool to enable the platform engineers and security to be more productive at their job and be able to get confidence that what the developers are delivering is going to be compliant, then that's going to let the developers go faster as well, because there's going to be few people double checking what they're doing and looking over at their back. So one mechanism that we used to do this is we said, okay, well, once the developer commits code, what happens next? And we decided to lean into Backstage as a tool to be able to leverage supply chains, which is basically, hey, what is the platform engineer's declared path to production for the application? So what are the guardrails that the platform engineering team is putting that says, hey, this is how the developer is going to get there, which means what we're talking about is saying, allowing, once the developer hands off the source code, how are we controlling the container build process and the process for deploying onto and promotion onto QA, staging, prod, and where the security checks that we're putting in to make sure that everything's good. So we're using an open source project called Cartographer that allows the platform engineers to declare their choice of and sequencing of tools for this supply chain. So you start off at the source provider. You can say, hey, I'm going to pick up source code directly from the Git repo, or I'm going to pick up artifacts that are compiled off of the Jenkins pipeline, or whatever your choice of tooling is in here. Optionally, you could, here our platform engineer chose to use Gripe to do source code scanning. A lot of our customers do SonarQube for compliance checks on the source code. You have the image provider. Here you can use something like Conoco or Cloud Native build packs to standardize the container build process and get the developers out of the game of being responsible for owning and managing these Docker files. That slows them down. It makes them less productive in terms of writing code. You can have your choice of image scanning tools that are going to take a look at the produced image and be able to certify. You have the ability to set up scan policies to say, hey, what level of severity is going to block promotion through the supply chain, and continue on to get to the configuration of the deployment. And here we're using a GitOps approach where we basically write the descriptor of the outputs to a GitOps repo. And the nice thing about Backstage is that it can be configured to provide visibility into lots of different clusters, right? So this is actually a multi-cluster process. This config writer is where the build cluster wrote out the definition of the application, and then we have visibility into a deployment cluster, which is actually pulling down from the GitOps repo and doing a run. And so as a platform engineer, I have this cross-cluster visibility of the life cycle of the workload as it goes through. And all along the way, we're capturing information like Git commits and shawls and image signatures and stuff like that, so we can always track the provenance and security of the workload as it progresses. And then we have we said, hey, how can Backstage be of benefit to the security team? And so we've been experimenting with this dashboard plugin, this ability for the security team to look at the workloads as a whole, identify, hey, what is the hygiene of the system? Where are we seeing CVEs in here? What are the patterns of the problems that need to be addressed? Or being able to drill down to a workload that says, hey, I see a particular issue I want to check. Bring me to the supply chain for that workload and allow me to check the image scanner results and see what's going on in here. Is there some new policy we need to do in our templates or our accelerators or our build process to be able to address the CVEs that we're seeing? So those are kind of the ways that we were reasoning about, hey, how do you grow out Backstage and provide more capabilities to different users? But every company, we're all learning from each other. Every company is coming up with new ideas and being able to share these ideas, and it's making us all better at doing software. So that's probably, I'd say, Backstage's biggest accomplishment, right? It's created this system where we're able to have these conversations about platform engineering and what it means to build and deliver these types of systems, what's working for us, and allow us all to get better at our jobs. So I think that's really cool. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jack. I think he's got stuff to talk to us about.
Awesome. So I kind of gave you a brief overview of who we are. So I'll just kind of help, well, if you want to read it, you can, but I'll get to the bottom line point there. As a company, whoever you work for, whoever you're coding for, Toyota, for example, they mentioned it earlier. Everybody's theme today has been about going faster, and it's interesting because digital velocity is all about helping customers go faster. So when you go faster as an organization, you can beat your competition. that's what we help you do, is go faster so you can win in your industry. The outcomes we're driving, I'll kind of focus on the high touch and consultative part. This is really key. A lot of other companies in our space that resell technology, they have some capabilities, but we are 1,100 folks strong in our digital velocity practice alone. So we're very much into the high touch and consultative partnership. And I'll speak to the last part as well. We align around the business outcomes. We help the different parts of an organization, developers, ops, security, infrastructure, work together to deliver against those outcomes that are needed for the business. So we create value by technology centricity, so bringing partners, people into the mix to help align and get the job done. And I am moving pretty fast because I think what's much more interesting is going to be happening here in just a moment. So anyway, we are obviously focused on cloud and cloud native, but as has been talked about today, developer toil, the cognitive load, moving faster, teams being able to collaborate, those are experiences and culture. That is really a key to what you do and how we help you do that as well. Some other areas of focus are also in data, artificial intelligence, as you see there. And I really want to highlight again talent and support. So not only do we have open headcount, we have currently 14 positions open for digital velocity. We have 270 engineering positions open right now. But we also work with other companies, partners, such as in the room today we have Infinite Ranges. They have a bench of folks that would be working on project-based initiatives. And so we have our own pool of employees and we work with companies to leverage their talent by project. So there is a lot that can be unpacked there from a talent and support standpoint. Really quickly, if you're interested in digital velocity helping your business go faster, or you're interested in thinking about how you can join the team and add value, this is how our practice is organized. So there's a role really for anybody with talent in the room, whether it's working on the platforms as have been discussed tonight, being very specific on cloud or cloud native, or if you're passionate about being part of a talent pool or helping organize a talent pool. There's all the way across the board we have different facets of where people make the difference. These are those categories. And I did want to also highlight, to kind of close out, we have the big names that we work with. These are the logos of customers that we've helped with our digital velocity practice. And I throw them up here not as an area of pride to say we've done good work. That's true too. But really, if you're interested in, like for example, Toyota is one of my favorite brands. I've bought, with my wife and I, 10 new or certified pre-owned Toyotas. So very proud to say like that brand means something to me. The companies we work with may mean something to you, whether it's if you're a former veteran, USAA as an example. So we work with a large, deep breadth of customers, and so it's kind of fun. Every day could be a really different adventure. And we take from those different experiences and learnings and grow stronger from that as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and throw one more plug out there. In the room we have Brandon Seymour. Brandon, if you could stand up for me, please.
Hey, thank you guys. I actually work with CDW as well. I come from an acquisition with Sirius and have been with the company now for 5 years. And I'm going to selfishly plug the VMware user group. I'm helping to lead that group out of Dallas, Fort Worth. I don't know if you've heard of them, but if you just go out, Google, or go to www.vmug.com, you can get connected in with your local resource. It's all things VMware, Tanzu. We have conversations around Kubernetes and developer conversations around Tanzu and other things like that, and what's happening with multi-cloud. It's a really great group. We have, I think, over 500 users throughout the community. We meet on a quarterly basis, and it's all free to you. Lots of resources, lots of good ways for you to plug in, and just continue to connect into the community and stuff. So thank you guys.
Thank you so much for that. I brought Brandon up, to plug because we're here in the room, right? But also to kind of show you we're now joining this community here in Dallas for CNCF. Thank you, Mars and Bryan and team for the welcome. But we're involved in other communities as well. We believe in that reciprocal approach, right? Being plugged in, helping, and we don't just sell stuff. We work side by side, roll up our sleeves, and we're part of the community with you as well. So thank you for that, Brandon, so much. For the very last part of our time here together, I'm going to invite all the presenters back up. Mitch, Bryan, Corby. We're going to do a little Q&A live panel. So this is your opportunity. I'll walk over and give you a chance to ask questions of the group. So if anybody has any questions, you want to raise your hand, I'll walk over with the mic so you can ask your question. But these folks are here for you right now to kind of recap the night and help tie up any loose ends. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, can you please show us some open roles that you have available at CDW today?
Sure, yeah, I can go ahead and before we wrap, I can pull up our website and show you our open roles, absolutely. Anybody else, questions?
So I think we saw a lot on program or engineering, but I didn't see a lot on role-based authentication for data, access to data in particular. Is that there, and how mature is that?
So the way that data is handled right now is through abstraction, what they call services in the system. The approach that we've taken to that is that when we need to handle role-based authentication or credential abstraction or whatever in order to get to the data service, we've been doing that at a level out from Backstage. So we have basically we use what we call a service binding process and credential management process, neither of which are directly integrated with Backstage. But I'll turn over to Bryan and Mitch if you all have seen different approaches on this.
Yeah, I'll just make one small comment. If you go to the Backstage website, when they initially showed Backstage and they were like showcasing it, like Spotify team, at the very end of the bottom of the actual demos is basically a managed airflow solution behind the scenes. And so to make this super simple, there's RBAC plugins, right? So you can grant and restrict. So you would have to worry kind of more about the actual infrastructure in the back, but those individual privileges you can restrict based off of that AD, right? And so you can put a policy against, say, he doesn't need to touch any data, but this one does, right? So it kind of, what I've also seen too, small comment, is kind of this ability to basically ping data meshes, right, and actually kind of interact with different data sources like that. So it's a combination of RBAC and that. That's what I see.
I got a question. So we saw your app that you developed, the Spring app. You can see that. What's the difference between Tanzu, Spring app, or web app? There should be something about the configuration or runtime parameter you should have set for Tanzu.
No, I apologize. Yeah, just make sure. Actually, the name Tanzu was there because that's our brand name, and that's just something we slapped on the app. There was nothing Tanzu specific about that app. So that was a Spring application, and there are no runtime dependencies on the application to build it.
But when they deploy it, when you say run it, right, it has to go get it somewhere. You should have.
I'm so sorry, what was
No, we get the Backstage as a UI, right? We get that call, right? So when you say that it's a web app we created, that's fine, that's a black box. That's a deployable code wherever it has come from. When you say run it, then you ran it in a one-time, it should have spun off something at the back.
Oh, yes, and I didn't actually show that piece because that's not part of backstage, and that wasn't the concept of the talk. So in Tom's application platform, that same cartographer, that workflow you saw that was done on the build cluster, we run a miniature version of that on the developer workstation, so that we can just, and we integrate with open source project called Tilt, which is allows you to do things like live updates of code on the running containers and use the remote debugger on the IDE and stuff like that. So that's how you get from A to B to where you had that code running on the server. But like I said, that wasn't backstage pertinent, so I didn't show that piece.
I got a question for Toyota. With the Chofer stuff that you sort of were walking through and demonstrating, is that something that you guys designed and built in-house alone, or did you bring in partners to sort of help design and build that? Can you kind of talk to, like, where did that kind of concept come from, and how did that progress a little bit, I guess, as well?
Yeah, definitely the vision and ideas were all in-house for all of that. I mean, at that point in time, a lot of the developers themselves are contract workers, but much of the vision and the actual features in there were built in-house, coming from our strategy and leadership, and I mean some ideas from ourselves as well.
Did you start off with blueprints, or did you start off with like a knowledge base? What was your first module?
So I mean, I'm probably one of the lone people that are still here from before we had it. And I believe that I started the modules before we had any backstage or any user interface. I was starting to build out some of these to, have those and reuse, because you can use it all without it, but this portal and user interface helps streamline everything, put it all together, make it easy to use.
Yeah, because I got Terraform modules already written right now that like launch all environments, so it should be pretty easy.
Yep.
Okay, yes, my question was kind of in a similar vein, which is, if you were a new organization and you wanted to kind of roll out something like Backstage across the entire organization, where would you even start with that?
I'll take that. So my recommendation first is buy that team topologies book. It's like $18. It literally is like almost a how-to guide, right? But my biggest advice, and this is also what Spotify suggests, is you start small. You start about 5 folks, and you just kind of start launching it. And then there's a couple of concepts like Dunbar's number, blah, blah, blah. Basically what you're doing is you start off very small and slowly start onboarding. My also suggestion is that you, so it would be like 5, 15, kind of slowly, expanding, but also find something that has high value, right? Once you start kind of proving internally that you can spin up infrastructure quickly, all of a sudden everyone's eyes start turning, they start noticing. I think one thing is too is that you have to kind of worry about chargebacks a little bit, right? Because this is an internal product, so that means that you need to find business units that will actually start, investing into your product. But start small, honestly, and kind of to the question over here. It doesn't matter if you start off with software catalog. It doesn't matter if you start off with search, right? Just find whatever is the biggest value. Start with 5 and just kind of go up.
I have a little bit on that point. Okay. So software prime management, start very small because it's thinnest viable platform and treat it as a problem. Your developers are your customers, so try to please them, try to make small things but appealing and usable for them so they don't deviate from the platform and start building their own.
Yeah, in that book, literally they call it the thinnest viable product, not MVP, the thinnest, right? So all these platforms can be super lean, right? And again, you're just trying to find what is the easiest thing to bring value and then keep building into that product.
Right. So you don't just sort of, say, here are the new rules, everybody starts using it. You do not do that.
That's Rogue IT comes in.
Yeah.
Share the accelerator cert example, and able to inject serves into the process.
That's also an area where you can partner with us.
I think that might be a little bit much at this point.
We're doing that with thousands of our customers every day. I mean, the DevOps conversation and things like that, and containers and all of that direction, and
a lot of customers are still trying to figure out what that even means for them. They're not nearly as far along as Toyota when it comes to, what is happening with their organization. A lot of organizations are just now getting their feet wet with these products have been around for a long time. I mean, VMware's been talking about this for forever, and along, with other industry leaders as well. But, again, to sort of selfishly plug us, you can bring us along, and we can help not only sell that to the organization, but ensure that you're doing it in a meaningful way, so that you're not sort of putting the cart before the horse a lot of the times that we see with customers when it comes to developing this stuff. And then there's always questions around like, okay, we build out these environments, but who actually is supporting them within the organization, because it's a very cultural shift in the organization itself. So who's supporting it? Who's doing the day two operational portions of that? Like what if you're running some of this stuff on-prem as well, who's responsible for that stuff, and what does that look like? So, sort of weeding through the mesh of all of that is really where we're really good at, and helping you ensure that you're building this out appropriately and securely, most importantly, as you move forward. So.
I'll piggyback as well, because I asked a similar question at KubeCon, and the backstage folks were there from Spotify, and they said, it's funny, if you just go to the plugin section and see which ones have the most likes and are most highly rated, you'll understand what kind of toil it's solving for. And that's a really good place to start getting ideas of where to start from these most used plugins.
What are the competing products for Backstage? So you get an idea of what it is.
I'm sorry, can you ask that question one more time?
Competing products.
Competing products.
Just to get an idea.
ServiceNow. Yeah. But again, ServiceNow is an ITSM. Backstage is a developer portal. Port. Atlassian just had a new one. I forgot what it's called. But there's a couple products out there. But I would say by far Backstage is easily the most adopted. By far.
And it's a CNCF product, it's open source, a lot of contributors.
If you go to the Git repo for Backstage, there's about 240 adopters. So definitely it's like one of those things where it just has so much momentum by now, right? So you might see a customer or company might white glove it, maybe get into something like maybe the Ford might be a good example, but a lot of times it's just kind of just the base. Yeah.
I think the competition is going to be on distributions of Backstage and plugins, not competitors to Backstage.
Yes, it's kind of a framework. It's kind of like VMware is a lot of other companies that are not competing.
Yeah.
Great question.
Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, everybody's questions have been wonderful, but thank you for that most recent one. Any other questions or thoughts as we end our night?
For observability, like what are the tools to use on the back end? Like what kind of metrics and
You want to answer the observability question?
Yeah, I mean, so it kind of varies. Actually, I think you might want to answer this one, but it just matters what tool you use, right? So this might be Grafana, might be something like that, but a lot of these tracings you just kind of build into the actual back end. I see Datadog, I see just basically whatever your tooling is, right? One thing I will say is that a lot of times you are again trying to give everyone dashboards. So it's a self-service capability and you want to be able to build out your practices, but again, you want that top-down, everybody, lottie gets a dashboard.
so can we integrate with some open source like a Prometheus?
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%.
And if you're looking for a recommendation, I think Wavefront is a great product.
When you were showing in your presentation about the type of solution you choose, the cost associated, is that driven through some kind of plugins, or is it something home-built by Spotify?
I can re-ask that question too. So the gentleman had asked if, how do we derive the data for the costing? What kind of, was it a plugin or some other open source tooling that?
Especially using the serverless cost so much, and it also improves the sustainability.
Yeah, so technically Spotify has a cost insights plugin. One thing that we have not really said out loud, by the way, is you have to do all this by hand. So, not all of it. Your back is no, but I mean, basically though, it is a lot of by hand. So there's a cost insight plugin that you can actually incorporate. It depends on the customer and what they use. So I see some of the tools that Toyotas use and others, but basically you just hit the APIs, right? So sometimes I'll see customers kind of have this gamification that was kind of shown on there. And again, they're just hitting APIs to make cloudability or something like that, right? And they're just bringing in that information and kind of gamifying it a little bit. Again, I really do want to emphasize, it takes a second. Like, this is not like, oh, you hit turnkey. Maybe absolutely your product, but a lot of times this might take 6-7 months in the making, right? And then by the time you kind of get to that, you can actually kind of gamify things a little bit more and make it more about your squads, tribes, and guilds and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Backstage at its core is the 6 items that Bryan identified. You have service catalog, you have APIs, you have discoverability, you have plugins, that stuff. When you get into specific capabilities like call-centric, that's not being provided by Backstage, that's being implemented by plugins that people are bringing into Backstage.
One last comment on that too is, I highly recommend what happens is you should kind of standardize within your company on how to build a plugin. So this might be like, okay, I have a React app, you're going to follow these rules, and then basically you would give out that infrastructure in Git repos to other business units. And whoever's closest to that problem would actually build a plugin, they would come back to that platform team, and then they would incorporate it into that platform. So it's definitely, like I was mentioning, builders for the builders, right? Developers and developers. But yeah, standardizing the plugins, give it out to other folks, and just make sure you have a good roadmap.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, if anybody has any last other walk-ins, we can field another question or two. But I'm going to go ahead and, per Ashley's request, show some jobs that we have available. One of the reasons I didn't is I couldn't see the mouse earlier. Give me 1 second. Mars, maybe you can help me get to the Chrome on your machine. Okay. Got it. Okay, so I'm just navigating to cdw.com, and I'm going to scroll to the very bottom. We have a careers section. And in the careers section, we have quite a few tabs and subsections that I wanted to call out. So we have a Meet the Team section, and we have folks that have actually recorded their experience of working at CDW. I didn't mention this earlier, we're ranked one of the best places to work by multiple organizations. I can't even list, but organizations that rank best places to work, we're usually very high on that list. So anyway, but you can hear it from people themselves that work here. You can understand what kind of opportunity. So if we say sales, we explain what those are, and you kind of see here technology and engineering, 269 ops. So if you have a student, know a student, or are a student, we have internship positions available as well. We have the ability to speak to where we stand on benefits, DEI, culture, community, and we have a full blog. And so I typed in here digital velocity earlier. And we actually use a really good talent management platform that's smart and can actually, if you search for a job, sometimes they're not good. This is a good site. But here you can see if you're an IoT specialist, for example, we're hiring for one, CX engineer, AWS cloud engineer. So yeah, we are actively looking for talent if you know anyone. Thank you so much for the time today. I'll go ahead and kind of close us out with a huge appreciation for the community coming back together. You're welcome to stick around, grab food, take food home, chit chat. We don't have to be out of the space quite yet, so there are tchotchkes and giveaways and gifts. Feel free to grab, and we're all just here for you. Thank you so much.